My name's Mike Keele. I'm from Los Angeles, California. I was born and raised there. I attended Pasadena City College, and at the end of my third year of the two-year college, I came home from school one morning, the first day of finals, and found that I'd been drafted. So I guess that's where the odyssey begins. After being inducted, we went to Fort Ord, and at that time, the unique thing about Fort Ord was that there were cases of meningitis popping up from time to time, and of course that was a real worrisome thing because meningitis has a permanent effect on you. Well, they felt that the only cure for that was to leave the windows open, and this occurred in, I was there from the 1st of February through the 1st of April in 1967. And so the trade-off was that for not getting meningitis, of course we all nearly died from pneumonia, but following that I went to Fort Rucker, Alabama for helicopter mechanic school. And after several months there, the helicopter school was about 10 weeks, 2 5-week schools. And they graduated 2 classes a week from there at that time, maybe 20, 25 guys in a class. So upon reaching Vietnam, about the second week of August, I discovered that practically everybody that I had gone through rotary wing school with was in the same group, and most of us ended up in the 1st Cavalry Division. You know, I didn't find boot camp to be difficult in the physical sense. Emotionally, it required some getting used to because everybody else's actions can get you in trouble. And so we were held accountable probably for the first time in our lives for what other people did, and if there was punishment, it went to everybody. The physical training and the physical aspects of boot camp basic training weren't so tough, but the adapting to being around so many people, 48 guys in one dorm, and if a Foot Locker was left open, everybody paid somehow. After they got us molded into something they could work with, I think basic training was pretty decent. The airplane landed in Cameron Bay, and of course it was full. I think we went there on a DC-8, and maybe 165 guys on that plane. And when they opened that door and you stepped outside, that was the shock of your life. The heat was oppressive, the humidity was incredible, and the smell was highly unique. And so a period of about 3 days went by in Cameron Bay where they were kind of ordering us up to go to whatever units we were going to go. And again, the guys I had gone through helicopter school with all seemed to end up in the same place, 1st Cavalry Division. And it turns out that the reason for that was that it was kind of a generational thing. We arrived there in August of '67, so we were 3rd generation Cav, the first generation having arrived there with the entire division in August and September of 1965. So every year, a new group would come in. And so we had very little experience throughout the company. Each company, I was in Company B, the 229th Assault Helicopter Battalion, and each company, A, B, and C, had 20 helicopters each. And the D company was a gun company, and that had 12 aircraft. In each company, there were about 120 men, and probably 20 crew chiefs, maybe 30 door gunners, and I don't know how many pilots they had, but it seemed like the pilots never flew as many hours as we did on the enlisted air crews. When I first arrived in the field, the CAV was in an area called the Bong Son Plain, which is about 2/3 of the way up the Vietnamese coast from, say, Saigon, going towards North Vietnam, the DMZ. And at that time, the area was referred to as having been pacified. That is, we'd fought the North Vietnamese and pretty much driven them out, and it was down to the point where the enemy opposition was virtually all Viet Cong. So when I first arrived, the area was fairly peaceful, pacified, and I spent the first 3 or 4 weeks in the field in the maintenance platoon just working on helicopters. And as the last of the guys from the previous generation rotated home, I moved into the flight tent and became a door gunner, and they assigned me to an older guy who was due to go home in October. So he taught me how to handle the maintenance of the aircraft on a practical scale, because what we learned in school, of course, was not necessarily expedient out in the field. He taught me how to take care of the machine guns, and so I had a couple of hundred hours flying by the time I took over that helicopter. I became a crew chief in October of 1967, and we would typically fly around 100 hours a month. And at that time, since it was a fairly pacified area, we didn't have enemy contact very often. And that began to change in about November. We were sent to a place called Kon to support the 173rd Airborne, which was fighting in the Dak To area, Dak To being very close to the Cambodian border. And the North Vietnamese were there in force. The battle that got us sent there was the battle for Hill 875. And so that was, for most of us, the first real enemy contact, other than an occasional bullet going by us that we had. At Dak To, which was next to a Special Forces camp, there was a runway capable of handling C-130 aircraft. And we landed there one afternoon about a week after Thanksgiving to refuel and pick up more troops to deliver out into a combat zone. And whenever we landed in Dak To, the NVA would mortar us. And the fueling point was at a location just off of the taxiway for the landing strip. They were unloading a C-130 on that tarmac there, and a mortar hit that C-130. It was about 50 yards from my aircraft, and it blew up. So I knew I was in a war at that point. we had had occasion to go into LZs that had been serious fights. Hill 875, I believe we were given the task of removing about 145 dead paratroopers from that LZ on top of 875. So memories there are very difficult. After that, I think we returned to the 1st Cavs area of operations about the 2nd week of December and stayed there until almost Thanksgiving. I'm sorry, we stayed there until almost New Year's. Had Christmas with a real tent and hot chow and all of that stuff. And then we were transferred up to the I-Corps area of Vietnam, someplace around the 17th parallel. And our first base camp was at a place called Phu Bai. Phu Bai is just to the south of the city of Hue. And we were then assigned a more permanent base camp at a place that had an airfield capable of handling C-130 aircraft called Camp Evans. Camp Evans had been a Marine Corps facility for however long they had been in the field up there. And it was shortly after that things heated up. We were having people shot. We had had nobody shot while we were down south in the 2-Corps combat zone. And within 2 or 3 weeks of arriving in the Hue area, we had one guy shot, crew chief was shot through the leg. And within a couple of weeks of that, the Tet Offensive started, and then people were being wounded pretty regularly. We didn't have anybody killed until February 22nd or 23rd of 1968. That was a door gunner. And then after that, we had combat operations, which I participated in, where we supported special forces at their camp in Phu Bai. It was a place called FOB-1, Forward Operating Base 1. And we didn't know they were special. We just thought special forces guys were special forces guys. It turned out that they were in a unit called SOG, Studies and Observations Group. And it was a highly secret organization. And we were taking the teams, which generally consisted of 2 or 3 Americans and a similar number of indigenous personnel, across the fence into Laos or into the Aisha Valley, which is a terminus on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. As we would send aircraft to support the people at FOB-1, they would deploy them out into the field. We'd either be picking up teams that had been dropped off some days prior, or we would be taking them in for their insertions. And as each aircraft was shot up in turn, they would take one more aircraft from our company. So we had 2 down there. And I was about the 4th one to go, the other 3 having been shot up ahead of me. And we spent, well, the first day, they said there was an emergency, and we made an attempt to get into the valley to rescue a team. They were being chased, hunted by the North Vietnamese. And the weather was bad. We probably could have gotten in, but our gunship cover couldn't fly in IFR, Instrument Flight Rules environment. So after trying to find a way through the mountains for about half a tank of fuel. We were told to give it up, and we'd try it again the next morning. The next morning, we did take off and move west towards Laos, climb through the clouds up to an altitude of about 10,000 feet so that we had clear air. Got into the valley, and by the time we found the team that we were supposed to pick up, we had been on a 20-minute fuel light for probably at least 10 minutes, maybe 15. And when you're on a 20-minute fuel light, that tells you that you've got 20 minutes of fuel. So we were in a fairly desperate state for fuel, and found the team. The helicopters were equipped with an electronic device called an aerial directional finder, the ADF. And in order to find somebody using the ADF, you would tell them to key their microphone for several seconds and then let go of it so that the needles could tell us what direction to turn. While the pilots were trying to do that, we were taking fire from a twin-barreled anti-aircraft gun, which was pretty much in the center of the Aisha Valley, but in a fortified hill area. And the bullets, as they came by the door, they looked as though I could reach out and grab them, and they were enormous. I'd never seen tracers that big before. They had a vapor aura around them, and it turns out that after some research, I discovered that they were 14.5 millimeters, so they were close to 3/4 of an inch in diameter. In any case, we found the team and flew up the hill to extract them from their predicament. They were being chased by the North Vietnamese. The pilot told the door gunner and I not to do any shooting unless he told us to, because we didn't know exactly where the friendlies were at that point. Shortly after he said that, a few seconds, we started taking fire, and it sounded like every gun in the world was shooting at us. There was so much gunfire that smoke was boiling up through the jungle canopy. It looked like the jungle was on fire. The pilot told me, "Keele, I told you not to shoot." I said, "I'm not shooting. They are." And at about that time, we got a clear visual on where the team was, and hovered up to where they were. We were told to throw out the ropes, and we hadn't been given any real instruction on how to do that. So I just threw them out. I didn't lower them down in any controlled manner, and they got tangled up. We were only able to get 3 team members onto the ropes, and the pilot, being a very bright guy, his name was Ron Gutwin, he made a decision to land them down in the valley and put them inside, because we were so critical on fuel that we would have never made it with the extra drag from these 3 guys hanging on the ropes about 125 feet below the aircraft. So we went down into the valley, being shot at from everywhere, and we landed on an airstrip called the Alui Airstrip. It had been used by the Americans, and there had been a Special Forces camp there until 1966. And so we were told that my aircraft was the first American aircraft to land there since 1966, when an Air Force pilot landed on it to pick up his wingman who had been shot down, and he got the Medal of Honor for being there. So I'm pretty proud of that. We got the 3 Special Forces team members inside the aircraft and got out. The chase aircraft, the second one in our flight, they picked up the other 3 team members, and they also landed on the aircraft, on the airfield. When we got back, the other crew chief told me that he ran out of fuel just as he began putting fuel in the aircraft. So we were desperate for fuel. The next day, we had to go back to the same area, but farther west, just into the edge of Laos. And the Special Forces team there had been on the run for 27 hours. One of the team members, we later found out, had been shot and killed in the initial ambush. The others had run, and there had been no way to get to them because of the weather that deteriorates towards afternoon in the monsoon season. So on the way in to pick up them, I had my radio turned on so that I could hear what the pilots were hearing, and here's this really desperate sounding Special Forces operator whispering into the radio, "Hurry, please hurry, please hurry." It was close to begging. He wasn't losing his cool, but he was obviously desperate. When we got to them, the first thing we saw upon going into a little valley, we knew where they were because the Covey aircraft, that is their control aircraft, had been flying around over them that morning and had a real good fix on their location. So we flew into a narrow ravine to pick them up, and the first thing we saw was smoke coming up, purple smoke. And our pilot said, "Roger, I see your purple smoke." And again, this guy whispered in the microphone, "I didn't pop any smoke." So we thought that we were being sucked in perhaps by the enemy. That was a common practice of theirs. If they could throw out smoke that of the type we used and we would go towards that, they made it easier for them to shoot us down. So there were 3 or 4 guys on the ground, all Vietnamese, and 3 of them were down on one knee, and they were shooting as fast as they could reload those CAR-15s. Just fire on full automatic, takes about 2 seconds to empty the gun, slap another magazine in it, and they were just firing as fast as they could. Another guy who was waving a panel, one of their marker panels, for us to get our attention, and by then, the door gunner and I had started feeding out the ropes to them. And it's at this point where the Special Forces guy says, "I didn't pop any smoke." So we were kind of committed. Our speed was down to a hover, and it turns out that the team had gotten separated. The Special Forces guy was probably 50 or 100 yards away. So those guys that we had descended down above got into the ropes very quickly, and we picked them up, hovered over to where the American was, got him in the ropes, and lifted up. Once we cleared the jungle, we turned around. It was a very narrow area, so we couldn't fly. We had to hover. We got turned around so that we could start gaining some speed and altitude, and as soon as we got to the mouth of that ravine, again, it sounded like the rifle range, and they shot us every way but down. I had bullets in the engine. I had bullets in the fuel cells, the rotor blades. A couple hit the transmission. It was a big day. But still, we were unaware that we were missing a man. And when we got out over the center of the valley and I started counting the people underneath the aircraft, we should have had 6 and we only had 5. So that was pretty stressful. We got back and got those guys down, and that was the end of my participation with the Special Forces. But at that time, I thought every Special Forces guy did that stuff, and it turns out they were very, very unique. So the rest of the time that I was in Vietnam was kind of anticlimactic, but that occurred the end of March 26th, March 27th, around in there. And in April, their reconnaissance missions had been in preparation for a division-sized assault by the 1st Cav, the 101st Airborne, and a brigade of South Vietnamese forces. And the first day that they went into the valley, my aircraft was down being repaired. We lost 35 helicopters, 5 of them from my company, 4 killed. And it was a bad place to be. That was the closest thing to hell on earth that I think anybody in Vietnam encountered on a regular basis. And that operation lasted about 3 weeks, I suppose. And because of the weather, the monsoon season coming again, we had to abandon that area. Found huge caches of arms, 37 millimeter anti-aircraft weapons, trucks, crew-served 50 caliber weapons, all kinds of individual rifles, thousands and thousands of weapons. And everything after that was pretty much an anticlimax. So that was how I spent my year. In the end, I think I had approximately 850 hours of flying time and 25 air medals. So I'm very proud of the time I did over there, and very proud of the people that we supported. I'm always happy when I get in a debate with somebody who's interested in calling us baby killers, to say that my best moments were in saving people's lives. The best day I ever had over there was the day we pulled the team out of Laos. It was maybe the saddest, but that was soon overshadowed by April 19th, when we had 5 aircraft shot down and 3 of our pilots killed and 1 door gunner killed. The days were pretty much all the same. You had a low level of fear that you woke up with, and it stayed with you throughout the day. If you were busy, you were probably more emotionally comfortable than if you had nothing to do. The moments of terror, being shot at, being mortared in rocket attacks and stuff like that, they went by pretty fast. But the day-to-day fear that just seemed to grip you, and I really believe you felt the same fear when you were asleep, because nobody slept well over there. Artillery was always going off at night. Helicopters were going over. You asked for a bad day. There were helicopters in revetments all around where our tents were that we slept in. And it was just a natural thing to listen. You'd wake up, maybe only half awake, and you'd hear a helicopter taking off, and you'd be listening. And sure enough, one night, I think it was May 8th, a helicopter from a unit called Blue Max. It was aerial rocket artillery. They probably had something like 72 2.75-inch rockets on board. It was taken off, and it went directly over our tent, and it blew the engine just as it was going over. Parts from that engine fell on our tent. It sounded like maybe kids throwing rocks up in the air, and they were just landing, thump, 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 thump. And within a few seconds, that helicopter crashed into the perimeter wire. There were trip flares on the wire. The helicopter hitting that ignited those flares, and of course the engineer stakes that held up the barbed wire fencing punctured the fuel cells on that aircraft, and it caught on fire and burned. And while it was burning, all the rockets cooked off. So the next morning we went down there, and the graves registration people had already picked up the bodies, but you could see the outlines of the crew cooked into the ground and totally covered with ants. It looked like the ground was moving, but you could see the outline of each one of their bodies. So other than that, a good day, I don't know. There wasn't much ice cream in Vietnam. When when I got to Vietnam, I was a private E2 and was immediately promoted to PFC, and within some months was promoted again to Specialist 4th Class, so I was an E4. And I held that rank throughout the time I was in Vietnam. And came back as an E4 with 4 or 5 months left to do in the Army, and was fortunate enough to spend that at Fort MacArthur, California, which was within about 30 miles of my home. Vietnam was not something that that I would ever want to do again, but I wouldn't give you $1 million for the experience. The camaraderie and the commitment of the people that were there was very high level. And so when I got back, I suffered from, I think they call it survivor's guilt syndrome. That was the first thing that bothered me certainly during the first years, that I'd made it and a lot of my friends hadn't. I spent the next 20 years drunk, and managed to carry on a pretty much normal functional life, got married, so forth, but always in fear. I became a police officer a couple of years after I got back, and I knew I was going to work, because if my hand rested on a countertop or a tabletop, there was a vapor of sweat that was there, and I always had that fear. Everything seemed to be reduced to what's the danger here, and it went that way for a long, long time.